Morning, friends.
Morning.
So we are working our way bit by bit through the Gospel according to St. Mark. And one of the things that I think we've been discovering is that Jesus wasn't a nice guy. And this discovery has been unsettling because, of course, we all have a vested interest in Jesus being a nice guy. We want to think that Jesus is sweet and sensitive and gentle to the point where he gives no meaningful direction to our lives. We want to think that if we throw him a scrap of religious commitment every now and again, he'll be profoundly grateful for it. And above all, we want to think that Jesus agrees with us on the subject of religion. And I would suggest to you that a Jesus who doesn't want to direct the daily detail of our lives, who acquiesces to our sporadic spirituality, and who approves of our every religious practice or lack thereof, is a little bit suspect, a little bit knockoff, and a little less like God and more like a feminized spiritual comfort blanket. And I think that when the church talks about Jesus as though he were innocuous and friendly and easy to get along with, the church does a disservice not only to itself but to truth. Right? If the ancient documents of the church of the church that we have today contain an accurate record of early Christianity, then the Jesus of history had more in common with the gangsters of our culture than with the priests of our church. Right? He cared almost nothing for the opinions of other people. Couldn't care less what you thought of him. He had no qualms about slaying sacred cows wherever he found them, and was very forthright about the expectations that he had of those who wished to follow him. And in this morning's reading, we're going to see all of that unfriendliness in large measure. So let's just get into it. So the background to this morning's Bible lesson is that so far Jesus has been doing a lot of things and speaking a lot of words, all of which has been completely misunderstood. Up until this point, about halfway through the story, Jesus has been a little bit of a mystery. So the religious experts who've interviewed him didn't understand him. The large crowds who so feted him didn't understand him. Even his own followers who lived with him 7 days a week didn't really understand him. He did some amazing stuff, he said some amazing things, but that's about as far as it went for them. So in Mark chapter 8 and verse 27, we're told that Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Now, a little bit of background here. If you were a Jew living in the first century and you had an opinion about the world in which you lived, Caesarea Philippi was an open wound in your consciousness. Jews believed that they were the chosen people, that they were special. And in their specialness, they believed that they had the right to shape their own affairs and to shape their own cultural life around their monotheistic and ancient religion. And yet for hundreds of years, this belief of theirs was at complete odds with reality. So I've taught you previously that following the adventures of Alexander the Great, the humanist and polytheistic ideas of Greek culture were superimposed onto the traditional conservative culture of Israel. And in the city of Caesarea Philippi, this Greekness of Israel was severe. So severe that Philippi became a home to the temple of this guy. So this is the Greek god Pan. Pan is the god of small animals and hunting. Now let's gloss over the obvious conflict of interest there. And let's imagine how you feel. You are a first century Jew. You believe that you are part of the chosen people. A key part of your belief and of your worldview is formed by the Torah, by the Ten Commandments. Remember that line, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me? Says something about you shall not make unto yourself the form of a graven image. And yet in the heart of your city, in your holy land, they're building a temple to a half-man, half-goat God who encourages his followers to do things I won't even get into. And furthermore, the name of your city suddenly is Caesarea Philippi, Caesar. They're rubbing it in now, that you're not one of the chosen people anymore. It's rammed down your throat that you are under the heel of pagan Rome. How do you think they feel? Let's look at this next image. So this photo was taken in the city of Mindora in Pakistan's northwest frontier. And what you can see in this photo are a group of Taliban. Mindora was and is a big Taliban area. And on, excuse my back. Yes, so this building on the left-hand side of the photo is their mosque in Mindora. These people are not just Muslim, they are fiercely Islamic. Part of the package of being fiercely Islamic for them is also being fiercely anti-Jewish. Also fiercely anti-American. So how do you imagine the 300,000 or so inhabitants of Mindora would feel if their city was renamed Donald Trumpville? And all their streets were renamed after Hollywood icons. Perhaps they had a Playboy magazine square. And how do you imagine if the mosque in Mindora was torn down and they started to construct a Jewish synagogue? I think you know how they would feel, right? I think you know exactly how they would react. For those exact reasons, in the first century, the villages around Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus now is, were hotbeds of Jewish nationalism and terrorism. In fact, in one of those villages in 6 AD, a man called Judas the Galilean starts the ancient equivalent of Al-Qaeda, the Sicarii, the dagger men. Their raison d'etre was to go around Israel murdering as many Romans as they could to prepare the way for a revival of Jewish religion and Jewish nationalism. So this is where Jesus is in this story. On his way to this place, he asks his followers, "Who do people say I am?" The reference in this sentence to "on the way" is an important detail, because in this question, Jesus knows his followers are neither at the beginning or at the end, but somewhere in the middle. And somewhere in the middle, a decision needs to be made about who Jesus is and what Jesus means. And that catches my attention because that, it seems to me, is the boat that we are in as well. Very few of us are at the beginning of our spiritual journey. Very few of us are at the end. Most of us are somewhere along the way. And Jesus just puts this question out there on the table. Hey, let's talk about me. Let's talk about who I am in your life. And let's most importantly talk about what that means for the life you live, for the way you relate to people, for the things you do, for the way you feel, for the way you endure things. Let's talk about me and you and what it all means. And let's start this conversation by talking about public opinion. So out there on the street, in your staff canteen at work, in the weird corners of YouTube, who do people say I am? They replied, some say you are John the Baptist, some say you are Elijah, and others say you are one of the prophets. Wow. So clearly at the halfway point in his career, Jesus is pretty well thought of. To liken him to John or to Elijah or to one of the prophets is to rank him among the most important figures in Israel's history. And for anyone else, this would have been a stunning compliment. But for Jesus, it misses the point. Similarly, in your social circles, people will have quite an elevated opinion of Jesus. People will say things like, well, he was a great moral teacher, or he was a very good person. Some might even say he was the greatest person who ever lived. And it's all very nice and very sweet, but for Jesus it misses the point. It's misguided. Jesus, it seems, doesn't want people to think he's a nice guy. He doesn't want people to have a positive opinion of him. He wants people to know who he is so that they can then make an informed decision about whether or not they want to follow him. Because he's very aware it's not for everyone. So he says, okay, that's the word on the street. People say I'm cool, people say I'm nice. Now, what about you? You. Who do you think I am? So now Jesus is asking his 12 closest friends to think back over the recent events and join the dots. He's saying, come on, form an opinion. What have you seen? You've seen me walking on water. You've seen me healing the sick. You've seen me raising a little girl from the dead. You've seen me turning 5 loaves into a meal for thousands of people. Come on, think about it. Who might I be? And I like this forthrightness because at some point in our spirituality, we must make a decision that will either entail a greater commitment to Jesus or a parting of the ways from him. Now, Jesus hasn't rushed to this moment. He's taken months. His followers have been with him for a while. But now if they're going to go further, they need to know in themselves exactly what it is they're following, what it is they've signed up for, and where exactly it might all lead. So he says, who am I? I imagine there's a shuffling of the feet and a putting in the hands of the pockets and a casting downward of the eyes, and eventually Peter, the most forthright of the group, says, got it. You are the Christ. Now, the word Christ is a Greek translation of the Hebrew concept of Messiah. It's a passive word. It basically means the one whom God has empowered. And when a first century Jew like Peter speaks about a person whom God has empowered, he's thinking typically about the great kings of the past, like David, under whose rule they'd all been free and prosperous and strong, under whose rule they'd been able to shape their own life under their monotheistic religion and follow their own beliefs. And to speak about kings like David in the past was poignant because Israel had no king. For many hundreds of years the kings were gone, and like Tolkien, they all longed for the return of the kings, for the return of the empowered ruler, Messiah, Christ figures, under whose rule they would once again be strong and free and prosperous and be allowed to shape their own lives around their own beliefs. And the less strong they were, the less free they were, the less prosperous they were, the less their lives worked, the more they longed for this man to come, to right all wrongs. Next slide. So this chubby gentleman is the Roman general Gnaeus Pompey. In 63 BC, Pompey does the unthinkable. He leads his legions not only into the holy city of Jerusalem, but into the precincts of the Jewish temple itself. Unthinkable. All over Israel. Around every dinner table and every coffee shop, people are speaking with depressed horror that Roman soldiers, whose standards and shields bear the images of pagan Roman gods, have dared to set foot inside their holy temple. And this depressed horror added fuel to their fire of nationalistic longings. They spoke more and more about the Messiah. Surely soon, they all said, the empowered King of God would come, and at his coming the Romans would be destroyed and we would be free. So immediately following the atrocities committed by Pompey in 63 BC, a Jewish revolutionary text called the Psalm of Solomon was written. Have a look at what it says. This was a pamphlet that they handed out in secret in street corners, hoping the Roman soldiers wouldn't see. It was a resistance document. O Lord, raise up their king, the son of David. This is the Messiah, the Christ. That he may reign over Israel, thy servant. Give him strength that he might shatter unrighteous rulers. Well, we all know who that means. That he may purge Jerusalem from nations, the Romans. That he shall thrust out sinners from the inheritance. That means get the soldiers out of the temple. He shall destroy the pride of the sinner. With a rod of iron he shall break in pieces all their substance. He shall destroy the godless nation with the word of his mouth. You can hear the Marvel music building in the background here. With the word of his mouth, nations shall fall before him. So, when a first century Jew, like Peter, uses the word Christ or Messiah, he's using that word to refer to this. He's using that word to refer to all of his deep-seated longings that one day God would send a supernatural figure to do supernatural things, to get rid of all the bad guys and make life stronger and freer and fairer and more prosperous for everyone. So when Peter says to Jesus, "You are the Christ," he's using that word the only way he knows how. Pro-Jewish, anti-Roman. He's thinking, wait a minute, Jesus walked on water. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. Wheels are turning, wheels are turning. He fed the 5,000. Wait, Jesus is empowered by God. He will use that power to expel the Romans from Israel, restore our country to its former glory. Jesus is Christ. Got it? Let's go blow stuff up. Now, as I mentioned, the villages outside of Caesarea Philippi, where Peter shouts out loud, "You are the Christ," are hotbeds of Jewish nationalism. 9 out of every 10 terrorists in first century Israel come from one of these villages. And if word gets out here that Jesus is Messiah, there's going to be all sorts of embarrassing misunderstandings. They're going to think he's going to lead us into battle. There's going to, we should get our swords, we should get our armor. So as soon as Peter says, "You are the Christ," look at what Jesus does. Shh. Shh. Whoa, keep your voice down. Don't tell anyone. This is so Jesus. This is so Cosa Nostra. This is so spy movie. This thing of ours. Shh. Don't tell. Because it's so easily misunderstood. And when I say easily misunderstood, what I mean is that when Peter calls Jesus the Christ, he has the correct title, but he has the wrong understanding. So Jesus then goes on, and he talks about what it means to be Christ, and what it means to follow Christ. And he does so in ways that are simply astonishing. Next sentence. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and must be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed. So rather than confirm the stereotypical understandings that everyone had of the Messiah, Jesus redefines them beyond recognition. He says, I'm not about to lead Israel on a glorious campaign of freedom against her enemies. I'm not going to bring back the good days. I'm going to experience suffering. I'm going to experience that thing that we all fear at the depth of our humanity. I'm going to experience rejection. And notice that rejection will not come at the hands of Israel's traditional enemies, but at the hands of her brightest and best. It won't be humanity at its darkest that will reject me, but humanity at its brightest, the Bible experts, the religious elite. My rejection will come after careful and deliberate assessment of my life. People will justify their rejection of me according to the highest standards of morality. I probably used the word rejection too much in the last paragraph, but it seems to me to be one of our most painful experiences. Particularly when it comes, as it so often does, from people who we love and have loved, whom we care for, whom we wish the best for. It's not sometimes the words that people speak that hurt us. It's the silence. This word is the antithesis of life going well. And for Jesus to use this word in describing the whole thing is stunningly shocking. And in the first century, in these violent villages around Caesarea Philippi, it would be hard to imagine a more scandalous statement than the Messiah will suffer. The Messiah will be rejected. This makes no sense. Then in verse 32, we're told that he spoke plainly about this. The word plainly there means boldly, toe to toe, nose to nose, confidently. He's saying, Peter, you're right, I am the Messiah, but about everything else you're wrong. This journey that you're on with me won't lead to an easier, better life. It will lead to a more difficult, painful life. It's going to lead to the nation that you love so much rejecting me and causing me to suffer. Peter, you need to know they're going to kill me. And so the frankness of this was too much for Peter. So look at what Peter does next. He takes Jesus by the shoulder, leads him away from the group, and starts to rebuke Jesus. True to his heritage, Peter can't cope with the idea of a Messiah who suffers. Nowhere, not in any scrap of ancient Jewish literature, is there even the suggestion that the Messiah will have a difficult life. So Peter listens to what Jesus says here, and he's like, dude, enough with this talk. It's just, no, Jesus, this is crazy. You've got you all wrong, baby. Jesus, however, is insistent. In the next sentence, he says, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. That's a bit harsh, isn't it? But this is an important issue for Jesus. If a person misunderstands what Jesus is, they will then misunderstand what it means to be part of him. And Peter at this point has got him all wrong. He thinks Jesus is going to take away the problems of Israel, and subsequently everyone will be happy. He therefore no doubt thinks that as a key follower of Jesus, he will be at the center of this new era of happiness, and therefore he will be very happy indeed. The view of Peter is essentially at this point the same view that you hear from some of those television preachers. Jesus wants you to be happy, he wants you to be well, he wants you to be prosperous, and if you follow him properly, you will have all of those things. Hence, there follows a series of very short, surprising statements about what it really means to follow Jesus. Next sentence. Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, he must take up his cross, deny himself, and follow me. Now, for me, there's something terribly dehumanizing about that sentence. The impulses, the desires, the ambitions, the lusts, the appetites, the interests that I have are all an integral part of my humanity. In fact, They are an integral part of my God-given humanity. They are what make me, me. And the idea that I, as a person, should abdicate my right to live for myself and prioritize the interests of another over my own is not only offensive, it is offensive to my humanity. After all, I, in the words of Protagoras, am the measure of all things. I am, so I am told, the captain of my own soul, the master of my own fate. Why on earth would I want to deny myself? It is an ugly concept. Some of the people who understand Christianity the most accurately are actually atheists. So if you read anything by Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or any of those guys, they get this sentence. They know exactly what this sentence means. They find it disgusting, and they are right to do so. This is unwelcome. Jesus talks about, what does he say there? You know, we should take up our cross and follow him. We're used to the cross. We like the cross. Visually, we're used to it. It appears in our jewelry, in our church architecture, in our furniture. Metaphorically, in life, we talk about bearing our cross, by which we mean things like, you know, having our mother-in-law over for dinner, or, you know, coping with a sore knee we picked up while we were playing hockey or something like that. That's what we mean when we say we have a cross to bear. But to the men to whom Jesus spoke this sentence, they would not at all have been used to the cross in that way. To them, the cross was the terror apparatus of the Roman state. More than any of the other symbols of Rome, more than the imperial eagle, more than the bundled fasces, more than the legions, the cross was a dread-filled reminder that they were not free, that their lives did not work, that they belonged to another society. And in the church, even at the best of times, we reduce sentences like this to some feeble sentiment about the merits of self-denial, particularly at Lent. I forgot to tell you it was Lent, and you should probably give something up. I'll try and remember next year. But in church we talk about sentences like this, and we say well-meaning but ultimately pathetic sentiments like, why don't you give up chocolate for Lent? As though Jesus cared about chocolate or whatever. In this sentence, Jesus is saying something robust. He's saying, if you want to follow me, there has to be a self-denying aspect to your humanity. You must allow my difficult teaching to be more important to you than you. What I say to you is to be more important to you than your own impulses, than your ambitions, than your desires, than your appetites, than your lusts, than all of the things that are such an integral part to your humanity. You want to give up something for Lent? Try this. Give up being an idiot. Give up being self-destructive. Give up being selfish. Give up being greedy. Give up being bitter. Give up holding on to the past. Do you see how much more difficult that is than give up chocolate? Do you know what I mean? And there's Christianity right there in some respects. Give up being an idiot. Then, so what's Jesus saying here? He's saying you may as well know, you who think this is going to end in a party in Jerusalem, that following me will come at the expense of your own self-interest. Look at what he says. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and the gospel will save it. Now, I'm a student of history, as you know. And so it's impossible for me to read these words and not think about the context in which these words were first read. The Gospel of Mark was written in the city of Rome. in the years following the great persecution of Nero. It was written to help those early Christians make sense of their faith in the world in which they lived. And in those days, when Nero was blaming the great fire of Rome and what he called the wicked sect of Christianity, admitting that you followed Jesus was a ticket to death. So can you imagine how these words on the screen must have sent shivers down the spine of our early forebears? Jesus matters more than life. No, Jesus, my life matters quite a lot. Jesus matters more than the lions in the arena, more than the bundles of wood on which you will burn. He matters more than all of the things that matter to you. In the next sentence, he makes the same point in a different way. He says, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his own soul? So now, Jesus puts life in commercial terms. The question is that if you could get everything that you could possibly hope for, would the getting of it be worth your soul? If in your consumerism you could consume it all, if in your acquisitiveness you could acquire everything, it would be a bad deal, Jesus suggests, if it meant not following the teaching of Jesus. So Peter has just received, if I can put it bluntly, a verbal kicking from Jesus. 30 seconds ago, he thinks Jesus is the Messiah. He attaches to that his cultural understanding of a happy life, wellness, prosperity, life working. The opposite of words like rejection and suffering. The opposite of all that. And in a few short sentences, Jesus hits him with his worst nightmares. Says, this is what it means. This is life. So we have, I think, in these awful words, two opposing worldviews. The teaching of Jesus and the culture in which we live. So our culture says to us, work hard, get ahead, do whatever it is you have to do to make yourself happy. Craft as much as you can a happy life for yourself and for the people you love. And that's not just the worldview of our culture, that's all of us. That's what you live for. That's what I live for. Do what you got to do. Make yourself as happy as you possibly can, given whatever circumstances you have. Right? That is our worldview. Make yourself happy. Is there anything wrong with that? I don't think so. If I get to do your funeral, and I really hope I do, I hope I outlive all of you. One of the things I'm going to hope to say is they lived a happy life. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? It's awesome. Lived till they were 105, smoked till they were 104, rode a motorbike till they were 103, died with a belly full of wine. Awesome! What's wrong with being happy? Nothing. But is such an ambition the worldview of Jesus? Can you even remotely construe that from the teachings of the early Christians? You cannot. I like being happy. Sometimes I try. But I do not believe, no, let me rephrase that. I do believe, but I cannot believe as a Christian that being happy is a goal to which we should entirely devote our lives. I think we must more properly believe that happiness is an elusive thing, that if looked for is rarely found. Happiness, it seems, is a byproduct of living right. It sneaks up on you almost by accident in the process of living a good and a decent life. What did Jesus say? Seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness. Allow its teachings, its values to shape who you are and why you live and what you live for. Above all, live good, whatever that means. And all these other things will be given to you as well. There has to be more to life than the momentary happinesses that we can acquire for ourselves on a day-by-day basis. There has to be something deeper, something more meaningful. And Jesus seems to suggest that in the pursuing of that deeper, more meaningful life, happiness creeps up on you from behind. Okay, we're out of time anyway. God bless you. Thanks for coming. See you next Sunday.